All right, welcome. Hi, everybody. How's everyone doing today? Welcome. So, today I am so excited, guys. We are continuing the second part of our four-part series on mental health. As you guys know, I am a huge mental health advocate, and also my company is passionate about words and writing. So, for this Mental Health Awareness Month, I am combining my two passions and inviting people on that can talk to us about how to tell their mental health story, either from a personal perspective or in today's topic, we're really going to be talking about mental health from a community perspective, or a company perspective, rather. So we really want to understand what are the words and the terms and phrases and kind of just general understanding that companies can put out there about their mental health perspectives. So today we have Tara Bodine. Did I say that right? I realized I didn't even get clarity
You
on.
did. You did
Oh,
good.
perfect. So Tara, give us a little elevator pitch. Tell us about yourself, and we can jump right in.
Yes. I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you for having me. I have worked in a variety of human resources roles for the last 20 years, and most recently has started my own consulting business called True North People Consulting, really focusing on helping small business owners navigate the complexities of business and people strategy so people can have positive experiences at work. Because when they have positive experiences at work, the business can thrive and the communities can thrive and families thrive. So I really feel passionately about giving business owners tools to help them be able to take their people with them on their journey, even when things are hard
I
or
love that.
complex.
I love that. And so you've been in a variety of like small, large, medium-sized companies. Is there any size that is kind of like agnostic to the challenges of people operations and running a business, or is it all across the board?
I honestly think that even if you're a solopreneur, you're having to work with people. Either your clients are
Yeah.
people or you have partners that are people. And so I think that it comes up regardless of your size in just different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, on that note, I think one of the biggest things that I see kind of popping all over the internet with, talking about mental health from the company perspective is really talking about using the right language. And that, in our culture, we're making this big mental health shift where, we're trying to destigmatize it and we're trying to use the right language. It's not always easy, but, one thing you see a lot online is people giving you alternatives of ways to describe things. Our culture has a lovely way of saying, like, I'm so OCD when I'm, really organized, or, my boss is acting super bipolar if he's up and down. So those are obviously kind of huge no-nos in the mental health world. That's just kind of like one example of using the right language. But why is that stuff so important from kind of that internal communications perspective, especially? Like, why does it matter to employees? I mean, some employees might say, like, oh, I don't care. So, tell us from your perspective, why does that matter so much?
I think communication as a whole is an important part of employee wellness
Mm,
at work, right? So even if you take away what people are saying and how they're saying it, having communication versus having a lack of or poor communication can make a huge difference as well. So, as someone who has anxiety, has struggled with anxiety, when undiagnosed for a long time, the things at work that would challenge my mental health were when I didn't know what was going on and I didn't
yeah.
fit into the big picture. Or I didn't know what, you know, what the perception was of the work I was doing or if I added value. So I think as a start, communication, we have to remember why communication is so important to companies. And sometimes it's like this check the box. We're going to send an employee email or we're going to have a town hall or we're going to make sure that we're communicating with our employees, but we forget why we do it. And that is the start of the connection to employee wellness and especially mental health, right? I think that plays a huge part in it. And then when you are spending that time as a company and if you're realizing communication is a huge part of your success because people understand what the business is trying to do, what they're trying to accomplish, why they're making changes, why they're making the decisions they're making, then yes, those are opportunities, I think, to make connections with employees and to use compassionate, inclusive language as much as possible.
Yep.
And you're not going to get it right every time. But if you're creating the culture where you're open and you're trying, and then you're willing to admit a mistake if you make it, then I think people will recognize those efforts and will also, you'll start building, you'll role model the culture that you want in your teams as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a good point, and I think that it is a good point, especially with mental health, about being understanding, because, as I said, some of these terms are just so ingrained in our culture. People may not even realize how offensive it is, and I think that's why I wanted to bring this topic up, because I think a lot of times people are like, oh my God, like I didn't even know that was offensive. But and it may not necessarily even be offensive to the person with that diagnosis, but it's still not a nice way to talk about someone. It's not the right language or words to use. So I think that's kind of the differentiator. Is it's we're trying to shift the culture, not perpetuate it.
Yeah, it's actually in so much of our language, and especially corporate speak, because for so long, corporate work and I'm not sure as much as like on the small business side, but definitely corporate America, it was like, check your personal self out the door, right? Like leave that.
Yes.
This is not personal, this is work. So we don't want you to bring your whole self to work. So there was a lot of, I think, inappropriate terms used, both on the mental health side, like you're saying, like, this is so crazy, or I'm OCD about this. But then we've also used other phrases like tribal knowledge that hasn't really been appropriate. And it's really ingrained in what we do. And it's, I mean, I'm guilty of doing it myself and having to think about, what are the words I'm using? What am I saying? And it's easier to do in written communication, I think, because you can stop and take a beat if you're not, go slow to go fast, like don't rush it. But it's also, I had this colleague of mine years ago who would always say culture is in the conversation. And I just thought that was brilliant, because it really is. Even if you have the most perfectly crafted email communications going out company-wide, the conversations that are happening in the hallway at the like water cooler, as they say, that's really what the culture is. And
that's
making sure that you are, again, trying to be as inclusive and accepting as possible, because acceptance is a huge part of mental well-being.
And I think it's also part of that external branding too. My next question is really kind of like, why is all this super important externally as well? But, I think part of it is because word spreads. We are in this, culture of information. So if you're using these, inappropriate terms, the word is going to spread. But tell us from the kind of employer branding perspective too, because I know that's a huge part of on HR is hiring and branding and kind of external kind of culture. So why is it so important to use the right mental health or any language externally?
I think it's much harder for companies to phone it in, right? And to kind of fake that they are, taking proactive measures for mental health, and also that they believe in an inclusive environment for it. And so I think you will find companies who, again, want to check the box and put that out there for investors or to attract talent. But then I think what our employees, now that I think our employees are very empowered since COVID, and especially the newer generations coming into the workforce, they're not afraid to push back. They're not afraid to ask those questions, and they're looking for companies to put their money where their mouth is and really show that they have a culture that supports mental health. And they want to see that you are treating customers that way, vendor relationships, that your branding supports it, but then that there's a follow through on the back end, and that it's part of the company.
I love that. And I mean, like, thank you, Gen Z, because we kind of grew up in a time when, it really was check yourself at the door. And that really, for people like us that were internally anxious, that's really hard. And that's, ultimately, I think why you see a lot of elder millennials as entrepreneurs like us, because, we were in that kind of shift generation where, like, we knew keeping our whole self was not good, but we didn't know how else to, show up at work. So,
it's internal struggle, and we were raised in that environment. I mean, I became really intrigued about mental health and identity at work when I was a little kid. My father worked on Wall Street. I'm from New Jersey, and when I was probably about 7 or 8, there was a big recession and he was laid off. He lost his job, and the turmoil and the challenges that he went through that process, through trying to find work, and just those experiences rocked his mental health and my whole family. Like, it impacts the sphere of influence of these types of events, and how people are impacted at work make a real difference to families and communities. And so, I mean, that was ingrained in me early on, that my identity and work, were super important, and being successful is super important. And that did mean trying to fit in and belong in a way that the corporate environment had set up, which was no emotion, no anxiety, work a million hours, pivot, switch gears, don't question, right? There was a lot of that early on in my career, that takes a toll, right, on you. And that's why I do think I agree with you. There's so many of us who are branching out to say, we've learned our lessons, and we've also gained our experience, and we have a lot to offer.
So here we are. And I think that the great thing about being in this position is that we can set the stage and use that right language, and be, attuned to saying all the right things. But how can small business owners like you and me, or even larger business owners that are listening, how can those people ensure that they are using the correct language, internally and externally? Sounds like having the conversations and putting it on paper, but are there like checks and balances? Is there, like for environmental and sustainability, there are certain guidelines that you can follow, and you can kind of do some checks and balances. Is there anything like that for health or mental health, to ensure people are, like, not even, like you said, mistakenly using the wrong thing because they just didn't even know?
I think really the best way for companies to do that, even small businesses, is to seek input from their teams. I mean, there are experts out there. There are many different types of coaches and resources and sites that you can go to, but also involving the team in the communication and getting feedback and creating that trust is going to create the environment where, if you do make a mistake or you say something that came across the wrong way, whether it be something like inappropriate, like saying like so bipolar, or it's just the tone of a message that comes across. I've been a part of several organizations that are putting out company-wide messages of critical information where they need employees to hop on with them, and the tone of the email is just way off. And all the employees are shaking their head right at their desk, like, I can't believe this person proofread that and sent it out. So, going and making sure that you have people around you that are willing to take a look at those communications, and creating that environment for input. Like, how can we continue to get better at this?
Yeah.
This is an example, but not necessarily in a work environment, but I'm part of the special education parent advisory council in my town. I have a son who is autistic, so I'm very involved with this community. And we recently decided to roll out Top Soccer, which is a program for kids with what we like are now, this is the language we're using, unique abilities to have
Oh, I
access to
love
soccer in
that.
a way that makes sense for them.
Oh my
And
gosh, I love that.
all the coordinators of Top Soccer had a workshop with the Massachusetts Youth Soccer Association where we were talking about language, because there's so
Love
many
that.
terms like, is it a disability? Is it a unique
Yeah.
ability? Some people are amputees, but some people are born without limbs. So like they're
Yeah.
not an amputee. So it's just, there's just so many layers to language that
Wow.
you
That is
can't
such a good point.
possibly get it perfect. You can't. But if you have a commitment to it and you're communicating that, and again, you're open to that feedback loop, I think it makes all of the difference.
That is fascinating. And say that one more time so everybody can hear, and we'll use that as a clip in our future. So yeah, just repeat what you said so people can hear.
About
Yeah, that it's about at least you're trying type of deal.
yes. Oh yeah. You can't possibly get it
That's
perfect every single time. But if you create an environment of trust, then you can people will communicate with you and create that opening to make sure that you get the feedback.
I love that so much. And
Yeah.
that is so critical. And that even happened to me. I wrote this like post about my nephew who's autistic, and I write for healthcare. So we are very used to using first person language. But
Mhm.
actually, I learned in the autism world that's actually not preferred, because it is a special ability, not a disability, exactly like you're saying. And this is literally writing about healthcare things is my job. So if I can make that mistake, and I was like, oh wow, that's so cool. I had no idea. I love that concept. My sister-in-law corrected me. Um, if I can make that mistake, and literally my job is to write about healthcare things,
Yeah.
it's really okay for your company to make those mistakes, but it is about owning up and just trying to do better. And I just really love that you said that, because it's that's the whole purpose of today's talk is like, you're never going to get it perfect, but
Yeah.
here's the things you can do.
And things change and evolve, right? The language around autism has changed so much in the last even 10 years. My son was diagnosed at age 5, and I didn't know any better. And I mean, we were puzzle pieces, and has autism, and it wasn't until I posted in a local like autism moms group asking for books, like asking for resources, but the way I phrased my question was really off-putting to a lot of the people in the group, and they told me, thank goodness. Like, and I definitely felt terrible. But they called it out and said, take a look at the way you're writing this, even down to the fact that I was saying that he has Asperger's, and that's not really an okay term to use
Yeah, that's
anymore
not
either.
it.
So it's just like we're all learning, and
Exactly.
being able to be open-minded and have people give you that feedback, and just know that, okay, like I made a mistake. It's okay. I'm going to learn from it and move on. And I think that, businesses that have this pressure to perform. And so there's this pressure for perfectionism, and um, also just to get it out and get it done and keep it moving. And I think we just need to take a step back and say, like, it's okay, but you've got to have the intentions be there and the follow through to make sure that the language you're using is creating a sense of belonging for everybody.
I love that. And that is a beautiful segue to my last question, which was really, like what can companies do to make sure that they're actually following through, and that they aren't just checking boxes, or, like you said,
Yeah.
phoning it in. And again, I think of the ESG example, like each year they go through metrics and report it out to their stakeholders. Is there something like that for mental health and, correct language. Is there something that people can do to ensure those checks and balances?
I think companies are really trying to innovate right now around mental health at work. It's a huge topic. It's a number one HR trend of the year. Mental health in the workplace and how companies are handling that. So I think it's from the communication standpoint, but they're also really trying to offer resources that make sense. And so I think without a foundation, right? I think without the foundation of communication and openness, that all of these resources could fall short. But there
Yeah.
are a lot of really interesting ideas out there. People are putting in place peer support networks. They're putting in place 24/7 access to counseling, different types of apps that help both from like a meditation mindfulness, but there's also apps that help you like regulate like what's like heart rate and different types of biometrics that are used towards mental health. So there's a lot of different tools that companies are using now to say like we're not just going to offer you like a yoga class once a week that 1/18th of our population can actually make. We're going to put out different types of resources that
That's huge.
that because it's like I was listening to a podcast recently and it's like that they have to be made for the people that want to use it, right? Like
Yeah.
my kitchen's top shelves are not made for me. Like I am 5'3", I cannot reach that top shelf. And we don't want people to feel that way when they're accessing mental health resources at work. We want it to be built for the people. And that might be offering several different types of options that make sense for the different populations. But I also think fundamentally it comes down to training leaders, business owners on mental health topics and keeping them informed, and then also having them recognize the signs of mental health challenges and burnout. Because I think a lot of it is, not to kind of go on a tangent, but there's one thing to say, like, we want to support mental health at work, but there is this whole uncomfortable feeling about addressing it when we're seeing a mental like health challenge in
Breakdown.
one of our people,
Yeah.
right? Like, can I ask about it? Is it against the law? Am I going to get in trouble? Am I going to open it up for this person to not perform because they're having a challenge? And so then also empowering people in business to be able to say, I'm here for you. Are you okay? What's going on? Knowing that you can still operate a business, knowing that you can still do so legally, that you can still hold that person to expectations, but also being compassionate, I think is a big
Exactly.
part of what companies need to do and work on.
And that definitely feels like a lot of training opportunities. There's definitely a lot of people in on my LinkedIn that I know work on that. So we'll be sure to link all those too. But I do think that is where like the training comes in because that's all back to language too. What the right things that you're asking. If you don't know how to work with somebody that is having a mental health breakdown, you could very well say the wrong thing and it could be worse. And so that's why training and learning those right words are super crucial for anyone, but definitely leaders.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I've seen most of the time they just kind of steer away from the conversations. I mean, it's either that or there's inappropriate, like, it's no big deal. Don't worry about it, right? And then they're blowing it off.
Fine.
I know. And so I think definitely changing the, I want to say the word culture, but it's culture beyond one organization. Just that we have people that are at work. Businesses are made up of people who come in with experiences and lens from all kinds of experiences that impact them and how they see things. So putting out one message, writing a message can be perceived 100 different ways. And so again, like, you're not going to get it perfect every time because how could you? But knowing that and knowing that we want people to bring, I had a boss who used to say like their whole messy selves to work. Like we want them to bring that in, allows us to be thoughtful when we're creating the communications that we're putting out there.
Exactly. And I think it's all really indicative of the way our world is going of doing business. I always say from my consulting perspective that like people want to do business with people. They want to see that you're authentic. They want to see that, you have kids and a dog and that you
Yes.
make typos too. And they want to see these things because they don't want to feel like they're doing business with a robot, which is a very real thing these days. So
It
I
is.
think that's, all part of it is like you can't expect that one way. You have to allow people to do business as part of a business, not just, online as part of their authentic, branding. Like you have to
Hmm.
actually allow it in the workplace too.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so
I know.
I
And,
think
and
that's
how many
key.
times in my career I've hidden that I'm a mom in job interviews. I've hidden I've been on Zoom calls during COVID and being worried about my children coming in on the screen. And now I'm like, I have to role model this. I have to role model that this is okay to everywhere
Yeah.
I work, everywhere I go, the customers I serve, right? I have to make sure that it's like, yeah, my son's home sick today and he's going to come in and visit us while we're chatting. And that doesn't make me any less good at the role that I have or the work
Yes.
that I do. It's a huge part of my life though. And I can't pretend it doesn't exist.
Exactly. And I think that's what this is all about is like that, concept of bringing your whole self and accepting that, people are messy and have mental health challenges, but more of us than care to admit. And it all starts with the communication and language that we're using to be inclusive and to make people feel like all of these things are okay, not just the mental health, but every piece of you. So um,
Yeah.
I
I even
hope
want
this
to go.
was a helpful conversation for everybody. Anything else, Tara? Seriously, this has been so fascinating to me.
Yeah. I mean, I want to even go out on a limb and say, like, in the same way that we look at autism as a unique ability for my son, I look at, for example, my anxiety as a unique ability for me throughout the course of my 20 years. Like it is not fun to have anxiety, right? It has
Oh,
certainly,
yeah.
it's hard to manage, but it has also served me in some ways as a tool. It's there, it was put in place for a reason based on my life experiences. And so, it is part of who I am. And, understanding the positive role it has played also helps me sort of address that it's with me all the time. Right. So I think maybe some of the stigma of mental health can go away if we view these pieces of us just as another pieces of us and not necessarily an illness or a problem that we have.
You guys, I did not pay her to say that, but that is literally the mission of the Chronic Boss Collective, which is the organization that I'm the Boston chapter leader in. But that's truly, what we believe as part of the Chronic Boss is that, it's all encompassing for all illnesses, but just because you have an illness doesn't mean you're at a disability. You use that illness to your advantage. It's your superpower.
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
kind of how we describe it. So I did not pay her to say that, but thank you
No,
for reminding
I
everybody.
wanna join this group, actually.
I
I'm
know.
not even a part of it, so
I know. We'll include that as a link, all the links on this.
fantastic.
But Tara,
Yeah.
thank you so much. This was so wonderful. And exactly what I was trying to drive home is that, it does really all come back to the words you're using on paper, in person. And
Mhm.
that's, where inclusion stems from, whether we're talking about, mental health or any other component of our lives. So,
Yeah.
all right,
Language
guys,
matters.
have
Okay.
a lovely weekend. Thank you, Tara, so much. Bye,
Thank you.
guys.